America is a nation that takes great pride in its freedom and independence. But what kind of freedom is beginning to dominate Western culture? Is today's idea of independence what the Founding Fathers intended? Could it be that the modern view of liberty is a path to oppression and ruin? Ladies and gentlemen, you simply must stay tuned. On July 1st of 1776, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia and voted in favor of Richard Lee's motion for independence from the oppression of Great Britain. And on July 4th, America's Founding Fathers adopted the now famous Declaration of Independence. John Adams was one of those great men who personally attended the meeting, and he wrote this about the historic decision. He said, "The second day of July, 1776, will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as the great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty. It ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade, with shows, games, sports, guns, bells, bonfires, and illuminations from one end of this continent to the other, from this time forward, forevermore." This is exactly what America has done for more than 240 years. On the 4th of July, we hold parties, parades, sporting events, barbecues, concerts, and a multitude of festivities in honor of independence and freedom. But few now recognize the fact that although this country's freedom was won through bloodshed and war, it was widely understood that there was a sense of manifest destiny in the United States of America becoming the greatest nation on the earth. And for nearly 200 years, the July festivities widely included solemn acts of devotion to God Almighty, just as John Adams recommended. Sadly, nowadays, even though the 4th of July is a resplendent celebration, most of the activities do not include honoring God. Why, His name is rarely mentioned in public forums today, and America is a nation that widely dishonors God through various liberal agendas. These are determined, in fact, to remove God and the Bible from the pages of our history. And we are seeking today to be free from the very source of our independence. My children are no longer taught that the providence of God is what made this nation the greatest country on the face of the earth. It is no longer believed that Judeo-Christian ethics are the foundation of prosperity. But the Founding Fathers understood this truth, and they consistently acknowledged God and the Bible as a source of prosperity and wisdom. The point is, although America celebrates and prides itself on independence and freedom, most have lost sight of why we are free and how we achieved that freedom and independence. Why people think that our own ingenuity has made us prosper. And we take abundant water supplies and grocery stores filled with food. We take this for granted, not understanding how we became unique among the nations. Why this country today now refuses to recognize that our prosperity came from a belief in God and adherence to biblical principles. But the Founding Fathers, they understood this truth, and they openly spoke of God being the source of prosperity. Why, they mention Him twice in that phenomenal document declaring America's independence. And state and national leaders have continued to acknowledge the fact that without God and without His moral principles being intimately connected to our government, the great experiment found in democracy would fail. Why, notice what the first president of the United States declared to the American people. George Washington said, "It is the duty of all people to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and to humbly implore His favor." Founding Father John Adams wrote this: "The general principles upon which the founders achieved independence are the general principles of Christianity." And James Madison, he once argued that the obligation of every human being to God is higher than his duty to country. Freedom of conscience is an inalienable right, because what is here a right towards men is a duty towards the Creator. And these are just a few statements made by America's founding fathers indicating that God was and should always be intimately connected to this country and its government. In fact, what many have forgotten, or at least they choose to not recognize, is that the Bible is responsible for the structure of our government, having three distinct branches. Why, the inspiration for this structure came from the Bible, where James Madison read this in Isaiah in chapter 33, "For the Eternal is our judge, the Eternal is our lawgiver, the Eternal is our King. He will save us." Now, this verse is why America's Constitution dictates three branches of government, found in the judicial, God being the judge, the legislative, God being the lawgiver, and the executive branch, God being our king. And this system came from the Bible, and it was designed to have checks and balances. So the God-revering men who formed our government read the Scriptures, and they understood that its principles would endure the ages. And accordingly, they used the Bible when creating democracy, in an attempt to cause this nation to endure the tests of time. They knew that without God, democracy would fail, and that is exactly what we see beginning to happen today. Why, notice what Thomas Jefferson stated about God when speaking of abusive forms of oppression. "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God? That they are not to be violated but with His wrath? Indeed," he said, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that His justice cannot sleep forever." In other words, Thomas Jefferson believed that America must always do what is right according to the Bible, and he firmly believed that injustice would lead to our demise. Now, Jefferson was a man who helped to frame the Constitution of the United States of America. And despite what some may claim today, Thomas Jefferson never believed that God should not be included in government. What he believed is that there should not be a single sect of Christianity that was sponsored by the state. In fact, his own words explain that Jefferson always believed that the moral values of God must be included, and if people refused to adhere to biblical principles, then they would eventually face tragic consequences. After reading quotes such as these from America's founding fathers, you begin to wonder how anyone could think that those who framed our Constitution wanted to keep God out of government. But the truth is, they never believed such a thing. Such rhetoric is baseless and entirely false. Why, consider what Abraham Lincoln stated regarding those men who wrote the Declaration of Independence. These communities, by their representatives in old Independence Hall, said to the whole world of men, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This was their lofty and wise and noble understanding of the justice of the Creator to His creatures. They grasped not only the whole race of man then living, but they reached forward and seized upon the farthest posterity, so that truth and justice and mercy and all the humane and Christian virtues might not be extinguished from the land, so that no man would hereafter dare to limit and circumscribe the great principles on which the temple of liberty was being built. Did you catch that? One of the greatest presidents in American history respected by blacks, whites, Hispanics, and by all free people, stated that the principles on which America's liberty was built came from Christian virtues. Why, he said that the Founding Fathers knew this, and it was done on purpose so that Christian virtues might never be extinguished from the land. Sadly, this is exactly what our corrupt government and many others are trying to do today, that is, extinguish God and the Bible from our governing system. But this was never the intent the great men and women that built this nation wanted. Why, there are dozens and dozens of quotes boldly declaring that God and the Bible should always be considered the great moral authority of our lives. Why, the Founding Fathers knew that we needed God and that the success of the great experiment of democracy depended on adhering to the principles of Christianity, which leads to the focus of this program today. You see, America and democracy is beginning to fail. The government is widely corrupt. We are on the brink of a fiscal crisis. We have lost respect in the global community. Why, racial strife is on the move. The economy seems to be hanging by a thread, and the reason is because we are taking God and His moral values out of the country. Why, our forefathers understood that lying was wrong. Why? Because the Bible said that you shall not bear false witness. But now presidents and statesmen cheat and they lie for money and for political advantage. Why, a presidential hopeful has told dozens of lies in federal court and to the American people, and yet she's still functioning as a representative of this nation. Is it any wonder other nations do not trust us? Why, bribery was wrong, and we knew this. And why? Because the Bible explains how it perverts better judgment. But today, bribery has been legalized and renamed lobbying or campaign contributions. Why, the nation as a whole once understood these inalienable truths. Adultery was wrong, stealing was wrong, murder through abortion was wrong, and it was because God said it was wrong. We understood why. But now we have lost sight of the truth, and we question long-standing moral values. And the last few generations have chosen to forget the biblical, enduring principles of Judeo-Christian ethics. Truth has become relative today, only if it's to our advantage. And there's no longer a clear, sound foundation of morals on which we can all agree. My Christian values are openly mocked on television, in classrooms, and on the front pages of newspapers. And the point is, the independence widely sought by the American people today is vastly different than that of our forefathers. Today, people are seeking independence from God. They want to be free of moral restrictions. They are seeking to be liberated from the ethics on which this country was built. And over the last 50 or more years, there has been a steady movement of banning God from society. And it began with outlawing prayer in public schools. And then the Bible became a forbidden document in the halls of higher learning. And then they banned posting the Ten Commandments in schools and courtrooms, claiming that, it might influence people, as if living morally was somehow a bad influence. By the liberal agenda of the administration today, it attempted to rewrite history books and take references of God and the Bible out of our forefathers' legacies. The children are no longer taught that the human race was made in the image of God. They are told that humans are the result of random chance selection and that we evolved from a fish which formed out of a protozoan mass. And even when there's no real evidence to back up such an outrageous theory, the status quo of our age is to tear down the morality of Christian virtues. The agenda is to create a society without moral boundaries, and the movement is growing. But God knew that this would come. You see, God knew that given the option to choose the straight and narrow way or the broad gate, that the majority would choose the way of less resistance. Because, it takes character to stand up for what is right. And we are becoming a nation that has lost much of its moral fiber. And therefore God inspired the Apostle Paul to write that evil men and impostors will grow worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. This is exactly what we see happening today. Men and women who speak eloquently, who have college degrees and have an appearance of righteousness, they are deceived and they are deceiving the American people. They tell us that Thomas Jefferson wanted God out of the government. They boldly claim that homosexuality is just as moral as heterosexuality. They say that we can be good without God and refuse to acknowledge that the only reason we know what is good is because we are a nation that was born and raised with a Bible in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand this truth. And to help you, the Quest for Truth has produced a free, informative booklet. The Eternal Church of God produces a variety of literature free of charge with no unsolicited follow-up. Today, we would like to offer you True Freedom. The distorted definition of freedom today means independence from moral boundaries, but that is not the freedom America's founding fathers established. Sadly, the independence most seek today is vastly different than what this nation long stood for, and you need to understand why. In addition, you need to realize how we can truly be free. So stay tuned, and at the end of this program, we will show you how to request a free copy of True Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, it seems that America has widely grown weary of Christian virtues. People want freedom, but the freedom many seek today is independence from the moral restrictions of the Bible. Not only so, they desire for society to give a stamp of approval to their wickedness. People are choosing so-called alternative lifestyles instead of the way creation itself displays that we should live. We allow the minority of unbelievers to dictate how America should be run. This too was foreseen by God, and He inspired the Apostle Paul to write, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come, for men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God." These words precisely describe our age. People are proud to be lesbians and transsexuals and the like, and posterity dishonors our forefathers by rejecting their moral values. We are unthankful for what we have, and yet we feel like we deserve even more. We lack self-control. We despise good. We love pleasure instead of God. By today, America is no longer a nation under God, and we are moving closer and closer toward perilous times. Our loose borders allow for terrorists to live among us. We have lost clout, we have lost money and resources, and we even now depend on other nations to take care of us. Our government and our economy have become so corrupt that without the financial assistance of communist China, America would have already fallen into a deep depression. Imagine that. A once powerful, God-fearing nation now relying on communists to support democracy. Is it any wonder that modern democracy is corrupt and volatile? I mean, the reason for such instability is because we are attempting to become independent from God. And such behavior is downright foolish. Now, notice what the New Testament authors wrote in this regard. Although they knew God, they did not glorify Him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. Isn't this just like America today? Why, this country once knew God to a degree, and we were not perfect, but most held fast to Christian virtues, and the nation prospered. But now we see dozens of foolish decisions being made on a daily basis. And it's because we no longer have a moral compass. Truth, in fact, is being systematically suppressed. Ethics have become so irrelevant, it is as if people are in a self-induced moral stupor. But sadly, most don't even care. As long as they get their Starbucks and they have their cell phones, most could care less about true American values. They would rather have independence from God so that they can wallow in the pleasures of sin for a season. By the American people and much of the world, they are deceived. And this deception will result not in freedom, but in oppression. You see, because when people seek to be free from God and His moral principles, it will lead to destruction. George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and all the great men of American history, they understood this truth. They never desired a nation independent of God and the Bible. And not a single president, except for the one recently, ever wanted this nation to be independent from God. What they desired is for people to realize that their freedom was a gift and that should not be taken for granted. And the reason is freedom from oppression It actually came to this nation through God. But just as it was given, so can it be taken away. Notice what God declared. But it shall come to pass, if you do not obey the voice of the eternal your God, to observe carefully all his commandments and his statutes, cursed shall you be when you come in, and cursed shall you be when you go out. In other words, you won't be able to make a prudent decision. You might think it's wise, but your wisdom will be foolishness. For the Eternal will send on you cursing, confusion, and rebuke in all that you set your hand to do, until you are destroyed and until you perish quickly, because of the wickedness of your doings in which you have forsaken me. Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. All of the great empires and civilizations from ancient times, none of them exist today. Not one endured. Why? It's because they chose to reject the moral values of God. Today, millions are choosing to reject God and the Bible, and perilous times are going to come. This ungodly course was again reflected in Paul's writings when he wrote that those who forsake God, they changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man and birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. And isn't this what America and many other nations have done? Teachers and professors teach evolution, and by this they have replaced the Creator with the idea that man basically created himself through a process of random chance selection. And fish, they created themselves. Birds created themselves. Trees created themselves. And humans evolved by going against the laws of nature. Instead of the constant law of thermodynamics, where everything goes from a state of order to disorder, somehow everything reversed for millions of years and went from disorder to order. But as soon as humans sprang into existence, well, the laws of thermodynamics, they went back to normal. And I mean, talk about foolishness. This has advanced a corrupt society, because when you take God out of the picture, then there are no clear definitions of right and wrong. And that which was considered sin is now up for reclassification. And this is exactly what we have done. We have redefined and marketed evil in the name of tolerance. But this moral decline was again noted by Paul, who said that those who reject God will be rejected by God. For God gave them up to uncleanness, and the lusts of their hearts, to dishonor their bodies among themselves. For even their women exchanged the natural use what is against nature. Likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust for one another, men with men committing what is shameful, being filled with all unrighteousness, sexual immorality, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and evil-mindedness. Now, some might be greatly offended by these words, thinking that the Bible is intolerant. But when it comes to sin and that which goes against nature, shouldn't we be intolerant? But the liberal media, well, they paint a very different picture. You see, news agencies, they mock God in the Bible, and sitcoms and movies, they portray homosexuals and promiscuous men and women as role models. This scenario is not limited to adult movies, though. Many children's films are propagating this deviance by condoning aspects of evil. Rebelling against parents, in fact, is portrayed as heroic in many films. Why, there are kids' animated series such as Steven Universe and Legend of Korra and The Simpsons, and many, many comic books today that they invent characters that are deceptive, they are homosexual, and they put them in a positive light. Why, in California, the public education curriculum now demands that children as young as 7 years old must be taught that having two mommies or two daddies instead of a mother and father is normal. Why, it's only a matter of time until this propaganda spreads to public schools in other states. Immorality is the spirit of our age. We seem to be infatuated with evil, and it's getting worse. However, though this deviant movement will be reckoned with, those who do not agree at this time should take a stand. And the question for you to consider today is, where do you stand? Are you seeking independence from the moral values of the Bible? Do we find ourselves believing that some lies are okay? Do you think that cheating on occasion is acceptable? Do we feel that the family structure of a mother, father, and children should be redefined? Is occasional fornication and adultery acceptable? Is murder okay as long as the child is in the womb? have you become tolerant of these kinds of things and seek independence from the great moral authority of the universe? America is considered the great experiment of democracy. The experiment has not been perfect, but it has had a positive impact on the world. We have found ourselves helping the needy and defending the weak, and you and I continue to be a part of that grand test. But we see that the experiment is beginning to fail. America, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and other Western nations, these democratic nations, they are losing moral ground. And the reason is because we are choosing to remove an essential element that makes a nation great: God. We are removing the catalyst for prosperity, the Bible. But the breakdown does not mean that you have to suffer for it. You see, God is still working with a number of individuals, and He continues to show Himself strong on behalf of those whose hearts are loyal to Him. In other words, even though many people's values are slipping today, yours should not. We need to get back to the basic values that made this country great. That is God, family, and good work ethics. That is what made this the greatest nation on the earth. It is not the ability to throw God out. Instead of seeking independence from God, instead of seeking freedom from morality, we should declare independence from the ways of society that are contrary to the values upon which this nation was built. Declare independence from that which is leading people astray. Make a commitment to honestly and sincerely apply the Christian virtues that Abraham Lincoln spoke of and that the founding fathers established. Seek God and discover what true freedom is. As the Apostle Paul wrote, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." To help you in this endeavor, we would like to offer you 2 free and informative booklets. Quest for Truth offers a variety of literature free of charge with no unsolicited follow-up. Today we would like to offer you True Freedom and Read the Book. The distorted definition of freedom today means independence from moral boundaries, but that is not the kind of freedom that America's founding fathers established. True freedom comes from the ability to live honorable, respectable, and moral lives, free from persecution. And you need to understand this truth. In addition, some might consider the Bible to be outdated or perhaps a bit intimidating. Maybe you think its values have no connection to our modern world, or it's too large a work and too difficult to understand. But our free booklet will show you how you can study the Bible and you can know what it says. Why the Bible is the most important book of human history, and you need to be acquainted with what God has planned for the world to come. There's no charge for our literature, no obligation, and no unsolicited follow-up, so stay tuned, and in just a few moments we will show you how to receive your free copies of True Freedom and Read the Book. For now, this is Terry Moore saying thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching The World to Come. If you would like to...
No one knows the day or hour when the